Hi, my name is Bryce Phan, and I did a case of Identitiy. Exposition. This story takes place in the late 1800s in London, and there are 6 characters, which you could say there's 5 since 2 of the characters are the same. The conflict. The conflict is Mr. Hosmer disappearing on the wedding day, and Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out where he went. The rising action. Mary Sutherland explains how she slowly fell in love with Mr. Hosmer, her fiancé, and how on the wedding day that Mr. Hosmer just disappeared out of nowhere and was never seen again. The climax is Holmes inviting Mr. Wendybeck to his office and explaining how Mr. Wendybeck's handwriting is very similar to Mr. Hosmer, and once Mr. Wendybeck gets filled with rage from these assumptions, he threatens to leave, and when that happens, Sherlock Holmes says that Mr. Wendybeck is actually Mr. Hosmer. The following action. Sherlock Holmes explains to Dr. Watson how everything pointed towards Mr. Wendybeck, and that he wanted the money, and that Mr. Wendybeck would disappear, and Mr. Hosmer would reappear. Resolution. We get to see Mr. Wendybeck's perspective on how he did this identity, and how Mary Sutherland is never going to know about it. 5 short story elements. The narrator's point of view. The narrator's point of view in this is Dr. Watson, and it's first person since it's Dr. Watson's perspective. Some foreshadowing. Near the end of the story, Sherlock talks about the letters and how it looks, and Sherlock Holmes uses that to find out that Mr. Wendybeck is indeed Mr. Hosmer. The theme is don't trust the face value of someone. The setting is that it takes place in Sherlock's office most of the time. The conflict is Mary Sutherland's fiancé, Dr. Hosmer, goes missing the day of the wedding, and Sherlock says he will find him. 5 forensic elements. The first forensic element is that Sherlock uses the handwriting to piece together that Dr. Hosmer is indeed Mr. Wendybeck. The second piece of evidence is that Sherlock can tell that Mary Sutherland was in the rush, since her boots were odd looking and half buttoned. The third piece of evidence is Mary Sutherland had a double line a little above the wrist, and Sherlock was able to find out that this was caused by typing. And then the fourth is Sherlock observed that Mary Sutherland had violet ink on her tip of her glove, and that meant that she probably was rushed and dipped her pen too far into the ink and got her glove a little bit dirty. The last piece of evidence is that Dr. Hosmer and Mr. Wendybeck were never at the same place, making them very suspicious. The character chart. Sherlock Holmes is a round character, is very smart, very considerate, and is the main character. Dr. Watson is very smart. He's also the narrator in first person. He's a static character, and he's always next to Holmes. He's kind of like his sidekick in a way. Mr. Wendybeck is the main antagonist. He is also Mr. Hosmer. He is dynamic, and yeah. Mr. Wendybeck is the mother of Mary Sutherland, helps Mr. Wendybeck in pulling off of Mr. Hosmer, and is a flat character. She also was very supportive of dating Mr. Hosmer, and yeah. Mary Sutherland is the victim of the whole thing. She dated Mr. Hosmer, and she is a static character. She is the one that went to Sherlock Holmes in the first place. And Mr. Hosmer dated Mary Sutherland, is Mr. Wendybeck in disguise, and is a dynamic character. Mr. Hosmer is also a made-up character by Mr. Wendy Beck.